You guys like Italian?
No.
Yes.
Yeah,
No. Yes.
No.
Yes. I love Italian.
Star Trek IV. The Voyage Home wasn't just the funniest film in the franchise, it was the one that saved it. After 2 dark, expensive entries, Leonard Nimoy directed a film about saving whales that became the highest-grossing Star Trek movie of its era, starring the full original cast and Catherine Hicks. It cost $25 million and grossed $133 million. Today we're counting down 14 weird facts about The Voyage Home. Stick around for number 1 because the script was divided between 2 writers who never worked in the same room, and the reason for that is one of Hollywood's most quietly absurd professional rivalries. Fact 14. The Eddie Murphy version. The film ends warmly, the whales saved, the crew pardoned, Kirk demoted to captain of a brand new Enterprise. It's gentle, optimistic, and completely fits the tone. But the version Paramount originally built looked nothing like that. When screenwriters Steve Mearson and Peter Crykes were hired, the script was written specifically around one actor, Eddie Murphy, who was on the Paramount lot at the same time and was reportedly a lifelong Star Trek fan. Murphy was set to play an astrophysicist at Berkeley obsessed with aliens. The Bird of Prey was scripted to decloak in the middle of a Super Bowl halftime show. There was a scene where a cat got hold of a phaser and vaporized Murphy's furniture. Catherine Hicks's character, Dr. Gillian Taylor, didn't exist at all. She was created only after Murphy's deal collapsed. Paramount got cold feet first, unwilling to combine 2 of their biggest franchises into one film. Murphy read the script, didn't like what was left of it, and left for The Golden Child instead. The entire supporting role was rewritten around a woman. The Super Bowl sequence disappeared, and the film quietly became something far more grounded and far more human than it was ever supposed to be. Fact 13. The original script was thrown out entirely. Steve Mearson and Peter Crykes were the first writers hired to write The Voyage Home. They delivered a script. Paramount read it and was deeply dissatisfied. The studio turned to Nicholas Meyer, who had written and directed Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and brought in producer Harvey Bennett alongside him. Between Meyer and Bennett, the script was rebuilt from the foundation. Mearson and Crykes received credit under WGA arbitration because enough of their structural contributions survived to meet the threshold. What survived was primarily the premise, time travel to 1986 Earth to retrieve humpback whales, the specific story beats, the dialogue, the character work, the humor, all of that was Meyer and Bennett. A script that had been rejected in its entirety left its authors' names on one of the most beloved entries in the franchise. The WGA credit arbitration system is many things. Predictable is not one of them. Fact 12. Meyer and Bennett divided the script and never collaborated. Nicholas Meyer and Harv Bennett wrote The Voyage Home under a specific arrangement that made conventional collaboration impossible. Meyer was contractually prohibited from taking a writing credit on Paramount projects at the time. To work around the restriction, the 2 men divided the screenplay between themselves and wrote their portions independently. Bennett writing the Vulcan sequences, the probe storyline, and the film's bookending narrative, Meyer writing the contemporary San Francisco sequences that form the film's comic heart. They did not write together, they did not share drafts in progress, they produced 2 separate halves of a script that Leonard Nimoy then unified into a coherent whole. Meyer received no writing credit on the finished film, despite writing the sequences that most audiences remember most vividly. The hospital scene, the nuclear wessels scene, the punk on the bus, all of it was Meyer, working alone, uncredited, contractually forbidden from putting his name on work that defined the film's entire tone. Fact 11. Leonard Nimoy based the Spock scenes on his own recovery. Leonard Nimoy had died as Spock at the end of Star Trek II and returned in Star Trek III through the Genesis planet Resurrection. By Star Trek IV, Spock was rebuilding, reassembling his memories, his identity, and his understanding of who he was in relation to his human heritage. Nimoy directed those sequences with a specific personal frame of reference. He had spent years in recovery from alcoholism, and the process of Spock relearning himself drew directly from his own experience of reconstruction. The way a person in recovery rebuilds their sense of self piece by piece, not all at once. He never stated this publicly in explicit terms, but it is documented in his memoir, I Am Spock. where he describes the emotional truth he was accessing in those scenes. The alien character reassembling his identity after death was being directed by the man playing him using the most personal experience he had available. The film's warmth is in every choice Nimoy made behind the camera. Fact 10, the whales were never real. ILM built everything George and Gracie. The humpback whales at the center of the film's premise were never real animals. No live humpback whales appeared in the production at any point. Industrial Light and Magic built full-size animatronic whale models for the close-up and mid-range sequences and constructed smaller motorized models for wider shots requiring movement. The animatronics were hydraulically operated and were among the most technically demanding creature builds ILM had undertaken to that point. 4 separate locations were required to make a single aquarium scene work. The real Monterey Bay aquarium exterior, an ILM blue screen stage, a practical tank set, and additional location footage composited together. A scene that looked like a continuous sequence in a single building was assembled from 4 physically different environments. The whales that audiences believed they were watching were mechanical constructions. The aquarium that appeared to contain them was 4 places at once. Fact 9, the Cetacean Institute was the Monterey Bay Aquarium. The Cetacean Institute, the facility where George and Gracie are held and where Dr. Gillian Taylor works, was filmed at the real Monterey Bay Aquarium in Monterey, California. The aquarium had opened in 1984 and was already one of the most respected marine research facilities on the West Coast. The production used both its exterior and its interior spaces, giving the sequences set there a physical authenticity that no studio construction could have matched. The antique store Kirk visits in 1986 San Francisco was a real shop. The Plexicorp factory visited by Scotty and McCoy was the Reynolds and Taylor Plastics factory in Santa Ana, California, a real manufacturing facility that, in a coincidence the production team appreciated, reportedly made custom plastic panels for the real Monterey Bay Aquarium. The facility in the film and the factory that supplied it were accidentally connected before either appeared on screen together. Fact 8, Savic was written out because she was pregnant. The character of Savic, the Vulcan officer played by Robin Curtis in Star Trek III, appears briefly at the beginning of the Voyage Home and then stays behind on Vulcan when the crew departs for Earth. Her reason for remaining is never explained in the theatrical cut. The unfilmed explanation was specific. Savic was pregnant. During the Genesis Planet sequences of Star Trek III, Spock's consciousness had been reborn inside a young body that aged rapidly. As part of that process, the young Spock had experienced Pon farr. The Vulcan mating drive in Savic had intervened. The pregnancy that resulted from that intervention was the reason she could not make the journey to Earth. The scene explaining this was scripted but never filmed. Paramount and Nimoy decided the backstory was too complicated to introduce and too strange to explain efficiently. Savic remained behind without explanation. The reason she stayed was sitting in a script that never made it to a soundstage. Fact 7, the film was dedicated to the Challenger crew. The Voyage Home was dedicated to the crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger. On January 28, 1986, 4 weeks before principal photography began on February 24, the Challenger broke up 73 seconds after launch, killing all 7 crew members aboard. The disaster was witnessed live on television by millions of Americans, many of whom had tuned in specifically because school teacher Krista McAuliffe was among the crew. The production was already underway when the dedication was added. A film about the preservation of life, about traveling across time to rescue creatures from extinction, was dedicated to 7 people who had died trying to push humanity further into the space that Star Trek had always argued was humanity's proper destination. The dedication appears on screen before the film begins. It does not announce itself, it simply states the names and lets the film that follows make the argument for why the loss of people willing to go to space matters. Fact 6, Chekhov's nuclear wessels line was completely unscripted. The scene in which Pavel Chekhov stops passers-by on the streets of 1986 San Francisco asking for the location of nuclear wessels, his Russian accent transforming vessels into something the locals cannot parse, was not in the original script as performed. Walter Koenig's delivery, the specific rhythm of the exchange, and the comic timing that made it one of the film's most quoted moments emerged from the filming rather than from the page. Koenig had been given the basic premise of the scene, Chekhov asking for directions to a naval facility, and built the comedic texture from his own instincts. The scene was filmed on location in San Francisco with real passers-by who had not been told exactly what to expect. Some of the confused reactions from people on the street were genuine. A scene built on a language joke between a fictional Russian character and real San Franciscans became one of the most referenced moments in the franchise's history. Koenig's accent did more for the film's comedy than most of what was written for it. Fact 5. The hospital scene used a real hospital's actual patients. The sequence in which Dr. McCoy walks through a 1986 hospital corridor distributing cures to patients, giving a dialysis patient a pill that regenerates her kidney, reducing a nurse to stunned speechlessness, was filmed in a real hospital facility. Among the people in the background of those sequences were real patients, real staff, and real medical environments that had not been dressed for filming. DeForest Kelley's performance in the scene, the barely contained outrage of a physician from the future confronted with what he considers medical barbarism, was built around a genuine reaction to a genuine medical environment. McCoy's line describing his host as practicing the same thing as cutting and suturing as witch doctors was not softened for the setting. The outrage was performed inside a real hospital. The building's actual occupants were in the frame. Fact 4. The punk on the bus was a professional musician. The scene where Spock nerve pinches an obnoxious punk playing loud music on a city bus, one of the film's most purely satisfying comic moments, featured a real musician in the punk role. The actor cast in the sequence was Kirk Thatcher, who worked as an associate producer on the film. Thatcher wrote and performed the song, playing on the boombox specifically for the scene, a track called I Hate You, which he recorded himself. He then appeared on screen as the punk playing it. The nerve pinch that silences him produced one of the biggest audience laughs in the film's theatrical run. Thatcher's double contribution, producing the music and appearing in the scene, gave the moment a specificity that a conventionally cast extra couldn't have provided. An associate producer got nerve pinched by Leonard Nimoy on a city bus in San Francisco, and audiences applauded every time. Fact 3. The film's cinematographer was nominated for an Academy Award. Donald Peterman received an Academy Award nomination for Best Cinematography for his work on The Voyage Home. The nomination acknowledged something that the film's comedic reputation sometimes obscures. The photography was genuinely accomplished. Nimoy had specifically sought an unusual visual approach for the film, wanting the 1986 sequences to feel distinctly different from the franchise's established visual language, and the Klingon bird of prey interior to be lit in a way that contrasted with how the Enterprise had always been presented. Peterman's contribution to that approach, working alongside production designer Jack T. Collins, produced images that stood apart from the franchise's aesthetic while remaining coherent within its world. A Star Trek film received an Oscar nomination for cinematography. It is one of 2 Academy Award nominations the film received, the other being for Best Sound. Neither is what audiences remember it for. Both reflect a production that was working harder than its comedy suggested. Fact 2. Michael Okuda made his first Star Trek contribution. On this film, The Voyage Home marks the first contribution of Michael Okuda to the Star Trek franchise. Okuda was hired as a scenic art supervisor responsible for the graphic elements, display screens, and visual language of the film's future technology. His work on The Voyage Home established the visual grammar that would define Star Trek's interface design through The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and beyond. The LCARS interface system, the distinctive colored display panels that became synonymous with 24th century Starfleet technology, grew directly from the visual principles Okuda first developed for this film. A franchise contribution that shaped the visual identity of Star Trek for the next 3 decades began on a film about time-traveling scientists retrieving humpback whales from 1986. Okuda's name appears in the credits of The Voyage Home as the starting point of one of the most sustained and influential design careers in science fiction television history. Fact 1. The script was split because Meyer couldn't take credits. Nicholas Meyer wrote the contemporary San Francisco sequences that define the Voyage Home's identity in the comedy. The fish out of water encounters, the hospital scene, the nuclear wessels exchange. He wrote them alone, without collaboration, under a contractual arrangement that prevented him from receiving a writing credit on Paramount Productions at the time. The restriction existed because of the terms of his deal following Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, where disputes over the writing process had produced contractual language that excluded him from credited work on subsequent Paramount films. Meyer and Bennett divided the script specifically to accommodate that restriction. Bennett took the credit, Meyer took the money, and the satisfaction of watching audiences react to his scenes. The funniest Star Trek film ever made owed its humor primarily to a writer whose name does not appear on it. Every nurse in the hospital laugh, every punk on the bus reaction, every nuclear wessels pause belongs to a man the credits don't mention. He wrote the film that saved the franchise and didn't get to sign it, and there you have it. 13 weird facts about Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, a film written by a man who couldn't take credit for it, photographed well enough for an Oscar nomination, and built around whales that were never real. Which fact hit hardest? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the franchise films that went somewhere nobody expected. Until next time.